Ladies and gentlemen, it is currently February 23rd, 2010, and it is my favorite time of the day. It is Day 9 Daily, and it's also Day 9 Daily number 75. Oh my goodness, we're going to be feeling a little bit special today. I should actually slow down my speaking so I don't merge all the words into one big glob. Today, we are watching Jaedong vs. Stork on Match Point. Now, I haven't seen this game. I'm pumped because I'm looking at the YouTube link right now. It's a 40-minute long game. Oh, God, look, I'm so excited I drooled. I'm going to clean myself up a little bit. I'm super pumped. Because, first of all, Jaedong is one of my absolute favorite players. Stork is one of my absolute favorite players. Hwasong-Az is one of my favorite teams. Match Point's one of my favorite maps. And StarCraft's one of my favorite games. I guess that goes without saying. So I'm really excited to be doing this. I'm going to take a brief break from StarCraft 2 casting, which is great because now I actually get to talk about something and I know stuff about it. I don't have to make up things and lie and pretend to be good at something. I can actually just go ahead and transition right over to the main screen and look at this. Oh, don't you remember way back when we did analysis of maps before the Day 9 dailies? Oh, what a wonderful little thingaroo we're doing today. We're going to be checking this out because, again, I've been doing almost exclusively StarCraft 2 casts for about last week. And, I'm going to be continuing to do so because there's so much new cool stuff going on in there. But I haven't really been watching the maps. I haven't really been talking about map analysis in StarCraft 2 because I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I don't know what's good. I don't know what's bad. Why would I load up the map and go, well, gee, doesn't that look pretty? Man, the artist sure did a nice job of rendering those bushes. And then I go over and we get to watch me lose a bunch to Tristan. So, fortunately, we are doing the StarCraft 1 action today, and here we are looking at Match Point. Ooh, Match Point. You know, let's do what I always love to do whenever we're doing a new map analysis, or whenever we're looking at a map at any point in time. Let's just do big strokes, big considerations of this map for the mid-stages of the game. I think that's a very important concept. Be thinking about the mid-stage first. So, right off the bat, this thing seems very important, because if I don't have control of this, it makes it a little bit harder to control my mineral natural expansion. It also makes it virtually impossible to hold my bottom right expansion. If he can get up here and cut me off, I have no way to reinforce, and he can just bleed units down there and eventually bleed me out. We also have this nice little expansion up here at the top and at the bottom. But you'll note that no player necessarily I don't know what the word I want to use is claims these. It doesn't belong to anybody. It's not like a fifth natural. Like, for instance, someone would call this your second natural, and arguably this is your third natural. But, I mean, it's on your half of the map. But with these expansions, it's kind of funky, because note that if my opponent's here and he works his way up to control his pod, it's just a little skip down here in order to take control of it. Oh, and by the way, one thing I want to note that's positional imbalance, I think the right half has an advantage over the left half. Because the right half, look, if I'm here, it's very easy to reinforce my expansion. I can crunch down on it like this. However, from up here, I kind of have to go, and do this little dip around, which means that if my opponent is here, I have to come down really far and then up. But, I'm not going to gripe too much on that. I'm just getting all overexcited because I'm talking about StarCraft 1 again. But yeah, these expansions don't... It's kind of hard to say that this player owns this one. Even though it's easy to go here by walk distance, we can have things happen like drops easily get ported over. We can easily do pushes up along this natural expansion. So there's a lot of considerations as to if I'm in this top right, am I taking this top or this bottom one first? A lot of players will take these three and then they'll be very aggressive and take this actually as their fourth base. Or they'll take these bases and then they will move down and up like this, thereby defending this bottom right one and defending this bottom one. All sorts of important things to think about. Notice how much I'm able to blab on and on just by considering what do I do with these two expansions. And that's obviously going to be super key in Zerg vs. Protoss because they are the mobile of the two races. Excuse me, they're the two most mobile races in StarCraft of, the three races. Basically, Terrans are mobile and Zerg vs. Protoss really aren't. So that's a huge consideration of how you actually go about defending that. And Hoja vs. Kal on this map was a wonderful example of Hoja just abusing, doing tons of counterattacks, and just desperately trying to throw down expansions at whichever one he thought would be able to stay alive. So yeah, let's just not do too much discussion. We got about 40 minutes of match to watch. And see, look, starting off right away. Oh, yeah, look at that great StarCraft music. We get to hear people cheer. And here we are right at the start of the game. And we have Jaedong spawning top right as the Zerg pieces. And we got our little neighborhood Storky Roo spawning at the bottom left. Now, something I guess I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about right now, just because it's pertinent to StarCraft 2. Don't try to think so much about winning. Think more about not losing. And that sounds like the same thing, but if you're a player who thinks of ways to win, you're going to find a strategy that works, and you're going to do it over and over and over again until it doesn't work, at which point you'll tend to abandon that strategy in favor for another surprise trick. However, when in my practice playing StarCraft 2, I'm trying as hard as I can to not lose. I stick with a build, and I want to play with it a little bit. I want to experiment with it. So I'm going to ask my friend, Tristan, to do all his possible moves to stop me. And the reason I'm bringing that up, she looks confused, doesn't she? Oh man, I've never seen a more confused coach in my entire life. If anyone wants to Photoshop that, I recommend it. I would love it if you posted that in the Day 9 Daily. One thing I love about Stork and Jaedong in particular as players is they are just dripping with examples. They are like jam-packed, bursting with little techniques in order to not lose. We see tons of amazing scouting patterns. We see tons of really subtle movements with the probes and all this sort of thing, just to make sure that they don't lose to anything dumb. So, it's almost inevitable that they're going to end up in very long games against one another, especially now when both players are really playing phenomenally well. I'm just always excited to see these two players play, not just because the games are sweet from a purely visceral perspective, but because they're really educational. So we're seeing, a lot of cute little movement around there with the drone. Looks like someone brought in a poster board with post-it notes. Oh, there is Jaedong looking festive in his scarf. I would like to state that for the record, I just got a scarf. My girlfriend knitted me a scarf, and it's beautiful, but it's also 80 degrees year-round in Los Angeles. So I have my stuffed animal Manfred, and he's wrapped up in it, and it looks friggin' adorable. Always making good use of my fabrics, and, I eagerly await the time when we're not actually staring at someone's thumb, giving the thumb up. Oh, we're back to the game. Fantastic. So one thing that I'm noting right now is the fact that Jaedong has yet to scout his opponent. He doesn't really know what's up. We're probably assuming that our opponent's going to be doing some sort of early expand or something like that, but I think it's very important that the Overlord, our first Overlord, manages to get here, because that's going to dictate whether we're allowed to make extra drones. Notice Jaedong is in fact making an extra drone right now. Or look, that larva is actually being saved up. Technically, this is a, one would say, oh yeah, he's just saving up and he's going to go ahead and just get a hatchery at his expansion. That's why he's not building it. But it's a little more subtle than just, I'm saving for an expansion. He is saving for an expansion, but to make sure he doesn't lose, he's going to save this larva up, and then he's going to build. And if in case he sees a 2-gate rush coming, he's not going to build this, and he has the larva left over anyways, and he can just build straight away. So in fact, a lot of players tend to confuse these build orders with these timings as something optimal, when in fact they're creating windows of protection against various strategies. And look at that larva save up. Now Jaedong's here. Now Jaedong's seeing, oh yeah, I don't need to worry at all about any sort of rush. So he's happily building extra drones. We've actually seen him gassing very, very early. And again, why are we gassing so early? If my opponent's early expanding, I want to be getting my layer up ultra quickly. If he's not early expanding, if he's 2-gate rushing me, I might have trouble holding it without zergling speed. The early gas allows me to get the speed very early so I can defend it, go on the the counter-offensive, and, continue with whatever my normal game plan is. Getting the gas, everything very standardish by Stork. Great ordering on those buildings. Getting that forge and that gateway up. They were actually both finished before Stork started building his first cannon. He wants to get all that tech up as fast as possible. Biggest mistake you see players make, and again, I want to relate a lot of this back to StarCraft 2 because I can, but players tend to not value getting things really, really quickly if it's part of a stable build. So for instance, if I'm doing a rush, like a bunker rush or a fast tank push, I know I need to get my timings down fast and make sure the push comes out really, really quickly, and undo a lot of damage with that push, because if I don't do it in time, I'll lose. Almost all players understand this concept, but it's when you're doing something standard, like what Stork's doing, early expand straight into the Corsair. It's in that circumstance that players tend to screw up, and they don't realize how important it is to get the tech up early. The example I'm going to use right now is the Cybernetics Core. A lot of players trying to make sure their probe production's constant. They're queuing up probes, maybe queuing extra zealot. Not sure if they want to build an extra cannon, so they build it anyways. And they get their cybernetics core up started around 26, 27 food. That's so late. You want to get it at like 20. 19 would actually be ideal for threatening the Zerg very, very early on. And that's because getting that Corsair out early to do maximum damage with it is critical. And you get the Scout even earlier, so you can do way big deviations if you get that early Corsair, which is so much more valuable than just having an extra probe or two at the start of the game. So, with your build in StarCraft 2, make sure that you're not falling into, or, I should say that once things start becoming a little bit more standardized in StarCraft 2, right now it's this big, giant pool of experimentation. But once people start standardizing techniques for, doing little attack moves or little harasses against their opponent, try to optimize that and make sure they're as clean as possible. And this is one thing that Jaedong's known for, is whenever his opponents are trying as hard as they can to get away with stuff, I mean, look how early that Cyber Core is. Jaedong's not going to just let Stork get away with it however he pleases. Instead, he's going to run these Zerglings in very early on. We see Jaedong getting Zerglings into the Protoss' base surprisingly often in this matchup. A lot of players tend to neglect that. And we're also seeing Stork do a little bit of counter-aggression himself. A lot of people would pull back with these two Zerglings as Protoss and do everything they can to try to stop it with that first Zealot. But what we're seeing Stork do is he just moves out with that first Zealot because, look, ow, ouch, I just punched the side of my mouse pad that's made of metal. Ow, okay, I'm back. Jesus, it still hurts. Okay, I'm alive. Sorry, this is a high-intensity commentary. But yeah, a lot of players as Protoss will do everything they can to kill off these Zerglings. However, Stork's moving out early with that Zealot, and what does it force Jaedong to do? To make a whole bunch of extra Zerglings. We actually saw about 8 Zerglings there. I'll actually rewind just a little bit so we can see that right when the... We're going to see the Zealot popping right over here. Yeah, look, there's 6 Zerglings right there, and I think there's 2 more even coming down. Right there, maybe I'm lying. I don't know, the observers will never let me know. But, 6 Zerglings at this stage in the game for Zerg, especially for a Zerg who gassed that early, is a big deal. You don't want to be getting 6 Zerglings this early on. But you can't just build 4. You have to build 6 or 8, because if the Protoss is sending 1 Zealot, there's an entirely large possibility that he'd be sending a second one. So both players doing a very good job, put a little bit of pressure on each other. And again, this Zealot attack is a perfect example of this, I don't want to lose to this sort of thing. I'm trying to get away with a bunch of stuff. You got 2 Zerglings in my base because I may have been powering too hard, but I'm not going to let you power hard while you harass me with just 2 Zerglings. I'm going to move out with my first Zealot and try to screw up your economy as well. Keep your economy as low as possible because I'm going for the fast Corsair. And the speed of my Corsair doesn't get slowed down if I lose probes. It just messes up my economy. But you do get slowed down as Zerg if you end up losing a handful of drones there early on. And look at Jaedong, just so good at getting Zerglings in. He's just really brave with them. Oh, I would have thought Stork could have blocked that off. But look at this. Look at this beautiful back and forth trade with these early units. Now, those 6 Zerglings that Jaedong had to make early on just to defend from Zealots, now they're coming in and they're being aggressive against the Protoss player. And this is such an important point. I'm going to stop the game and come over here on the main camera. The Zerg gets 2 Zerglings in early on to do a little bit of damage. The bad Protoss player sits there completely passively, doesn't worry about it at all, and takes quite a bit of damage from those 2 Zerglings. Stork, the good Protoss player, tries to do some pressure against his opponent, either by moving out right then. He maybe could have moved out a little while later, but he chose to move out immediately. Zerg sees this and goes, oh crap, I need to make some Zerglings right now to defend this. And the bad Zerg player will just say, I had to make 6 Zerglings and I didn't want to. Well, I guess my build's slow, but at least I didn't die. Jaedong says, okay, I didn't die now, but now I'm going to use these Zerglings and go right back in your face and be aggressive with them again. In other words, all these players are constantly extending the purpose of the units that they make. And there's tons of instances of this in StarCraft, and you should always abuse it as frequently as possible. So for instance, if you had to get an early evolution chamber so that you could get spore colonies for some reason, it's a great idea to think of a build that gets an early upgrade. That was actually a technique that Mondragon used actually ridiculously frequently for a really long time, actually still uses it now. When he sees his opponent doing this sort of thing with the fast Corsair, he throws down the Evo Chamber, gets Spores to defend against the Corsairs, and then gets a very fast +1 armor upgrade. Therefore, always being ahead of his opponent in the armor attack upgrade battle that Zergs and Protosses always have. So it means the Zealots will always take 3 hits to kill Zerglings, and then Mondragon makes a bunch of Zerglings. How cool was that he extended the purpose of that building? And of course, this whole Zergling-Zealot exchange is just another instance of that. Whew, man, I spent a long time talking about just like 10 units total in the game. Let's just come back a little bit more to the meta situation that we see before us. Everything seems to be going very standardly from both players. One thing that's great, actually let me just briefly recap how standard everything is. We see that the Zerg player has in fact taken these 2 bases and this 3rd base right now. 5 Hatch, getting the Spire up right now. The Spire just finished, but then getting the Evolution Chamber and the Hydrals almost certainly. Protoss doing his fast Corsair thing. And here we're starting to see some more interesting deviations. Jaedong is very good at getting the Scourge out outrageously early. Just incredibly early Scourge. Scourge. And this actually allows Jaedong to not lose any Overlords to that initial Corsair, and sometimes, but not always, sometimes he can even prevent the Protoss player from scouting with that Corsair, because the Scourge pop out so fast. Stork doing a little bit of extra aggression. Look how beautiful that was. Oh my god, that was so good. Oh god, this is just brilliance right here. Oh god, I always call this potential advantage, right? It's when you cause your opponent to freak out, but then you don't even attack him. So look, these guys moved out, but they're going to come right back. Alright, see, look at this. Just waltzing right on back. No big deal whatsoever. And then look at this. 2 Zerglings being made. Oh wait, look, even more Zerglings being made. It looks like Stork convinced Jaedong that he needed to make those extra Zerglings. Stork came out with those units, and Jaedong freaked out, made too many units himself. And then Stork just pulls back and says, well, I'm not attacking you. Those units have gone to waste now. You would have rather made drones with those, Jaedong. And in StarCraft 2, you can do all this sorts of stuff as well. It's actually just a common technique you can employ in any strategy game. If you're the player who has the map control, and the other player is trying to be greedy and trying to defend, you just move forward and move back. Move forward, move back. Little techniques like that will force him to make units that he might not want to make. And of course, if he ever doesn't do that, you just attack him and win. Very easy way to get a potential advantage. Potentially, he'll make way more units. And even if he doesn't, you didn't commit anything as the attacker. And by the way, I'm absolutely loving that gateway placement by Stork. It's so tucked away that it's going to be very difficult for Jaedong to scout with his early Scourge, which Zerg players tend to do in this matchup. He's just going to poke around and see that fast Templar archives and think that Stork is going to have fewer gateways than he might actually have. And see, there's a +1 upgrade being researched. I dig that. Jaedong, not to be fooled, just spots the gateways being made there. But again, building things in somewhat concealed places has the potential advantage for your opponent not to actually scout it out. So we like that sort of thing. A lot of people, and this is perhaps one of the biggest mistakes that you see any new players of strategy games, and therefore new players of StarCraft 2, is that they freak out so much at the idea of constantly doing something active to screw their opponent up or something like that. You know, like, oh, I need to harass him and actually kill drones, or I need to specifically pick off units. But there's that sort of passive harassment, which is making him do stuff he doesn't want to, that I just love so much. Fantastic technique. And some nice little dodgy Rogeroo, running the Dark Templar around. And Zerg right now is sacrificing control of this high ground pod that, you know, I asserted was so important. And we're going to see it really spring into importance in the later stages of the game. But just want to note right now that Zerg has pretty much elected to be split up right now, and he's not really going to value taking his high ground pod super early. He's still mostly powering, mostly just building small groups of Zerglings to harass. Again, Jaedong didn't make all those Zerglings just to defend against that early push that Stork did with the 3 Zealots and the Dragoon. He's going to use those to hold it off if they did choose to attack, and then he's going to try to delay this expansion as long as possible. And that's another thing that's just artful by Jaedong, is how he's able to use small Zergling groups to really get into Protoss's face. I strongly suggest that if any of you are struggling in this matchup, particularly with this stage of the game, if you feel like you're not in any form of control, watch a bunch of Jaedong games in a row, and you'll notice that he's always using these Zerglings just beautifully. Marvelous use. And other adjectives that mean good. And here we have some lurkers coming out. A little bit earlier lurkers than most players would expect. But Jaedong just tends to get things quickly because he's a baller. And the lurkers coming up, and notice that the lurkers and everything were burrowed, or they were being made in a way. I actually kind of preferred if Jaedong spread out a little bit, but being morphed right here, so he has his Hydralisks up here. And, you know, any early attack with Zealots are going to glitch around those morphing eggs. Just some nice little techniques going on there. Look at that burrow. See, oh god, that's so genius. That's so genius. Look at the burrow. He's burrowing on his high ground pod. 90% of Zerg players on Icy Cup would pull those lurkers off the high ground pod. They would take their lurkers off the high ground pod, come down here, and then move this way, because they'd say, well, I need to defend this expansion. But then they'd sacrifice control of this. Jaedong knows how important this is for defending both of these expansions. He's going to leave the lurkers here, and he's going to try to get the Hydralisks there in time just to cut off Stork's units right at the ramp. And look at this. Going just as planned. Has to be really careful for about the storm, but, you know, he's being careful about it, so that's good. And see, only now, oh yes, using more Zergling stuff, but only now is Jaedong pulling back all those lurkers. And one would possibly say that this was a little bit of a miscalculation by Jaedong. I don't think this is as bad as it looks. I mean, if the storm hits those drones, that's pretty severe. But for the most part, this exchange is going to be way positive for Zerg. Look at that. Zerg just demolished that force, and that's a lot of gas and a lot of minerals early on for Protoss for pretty much nothing. Just stop drones mining for a little bit. One thing that Jaedong could have potentially done if he didn't even want the units to get up there in the first place would be to have left 4 lurkers here and pulled 2 back, but still favoring the majority of units on that high ground pod. And just take a brief glance at the mini-map in the bottom left. Overlords spread out everywhere. Beautiful coverage of all those bases. Absolutely nothing sneaking by there without Jaedong knowing about it. And continuing to reposition. Jaedong's also super, super aggressive. But this is something I like. This is something I call a cut-in, which is where if you want to attack 2 bases, let's say you want to attack one of these 2 bases, players tend to go bam and just go straight for the one they want. But cutting in is when you go in between these 2 expansions and then you go for the one that you want. Like that. So see, he went for the bottom expansion, just pushed anything back that would potentially give him trouble, and then moves right in. And we have a Dark Templar being an obnoxious little dude. Just one more example of the cut-in. If there was a Protoss expansion here, and we wanted to attack this one, it's much better to get control of this area as Zerg and then go for one or the other than it is to like swing around here and hit the top. A lot of good examples of that happening on Destination as well. And see, now we're starting to see abuse of that high ground pod. I'm going to go ahead and try not to pause it too much anymore because we still have like 30 minutes to go. We've been going for about 25 minutes now, so it might be a little bit longer of a Day 9 daily, but I doubt any of you are going to complain. Because it's StarCraft, and what a glorious strategy game. We're seeing right now that Jaedong's getting control of his opponent's high ground pod, which just means doom for Protoss. Protoss is really not going to have the opportunity to take his expansion at the top left with all this sort of stuff going on. So this is a very sticky spot for Protoss. And this is the stage in the game where a lot of Zerg players screw up by trying to get real greedy again. They say, oh, I have the high ground pod, it's no big deal, you know. And they start making a ton of drones, you know, they add on another evolution chamber. You really need to start committing quite a few units now that you're at this stage of the game. You're going to have about 7 hatcheries up at this point, and it's super critical that you actually commit to making a lot of units out of them. Jaedong doing a smart thing, expanding to this bottom one. Maybe would have preferred this top one if he's already getting control of this. If he's sending all his units in a big line this way, then this expansion becomes super safe. And I'm already seeing this attack move down right here, and I'm thinking, ooh, that bottom expansion looks real dangerous to take. But of course, Jaedong's just going to scourge some observers, and it's going to be no problem. Would like to see some lurkers there. But it seems like Jaedong has a pretty good sense of what's going on. Oh, okay, there's the lurkers. There we go. Yeah, looks like a little bit too much stuff for Jaedong to be able to hold off, but maybe these lurkers are going to delay it just enough. But this is the sort of thing that you need to be considering anytime you're taking your opponent's high ground pod, is how you're going to respond when your opponent inevitably tries to push out of here. And it looks like Jaedong was just saying, yeah, I'm going to use most of my low-tech units, Hydras and Lings, in order to defend it, rather than like positioning a whole bunch of lurkers there. And I don't know if that's so much if that's, you know, that, I don't know, it feels a little bit like a blunder. Because look right now what we're seeing. All these lurkers that would be so useful for defending this bottom expansion are way up here and have to curl all the way around. We can't quite set up the ideal position that we want. Jaedong looks like he barely has enough units for it, but, you know, still, you want to, I mean, still, just taking this expansion, the only way Protoss can do anything is by, you know, coming up here and then crossing up into the middle, which means the Protoss would have to break this area or this area, which would be two high ground areas, which is going to be a giant pain in the ass no matter what. But we're seeing the Protoss push relatively easily down this lane. Now this is looking like a much more reasonable setup for Zerg. Hold position lurkers. This is one thing that I hope just resurfaces in StarCraft 2, is those holy crap moments, you know, where you see hold position lurkers, and then he unhold positions them and just rips through everything. But either way, don't get too over-eager with hold position stuff and trying to be too fancy or tricky with that, because it can backfire a lot, and often it's better to just have the lurkers on attack so it deters the Protoss from even moving up there in the first place. And we're seeing Jaedong have plenty of stuff to be actually able to kill this stuff off. Now see, this is part of the reason why I said, once you set up a big solid contain against your opponent, make a ton of units, don't power. Because all Stork is thinking right now is, I'm probably not going to get to expand for a long time, unless I put up a huge, sick fight, and the Protoss is going to add on way more gateways than he normally would, so he can flood with Zealots and bust the front. Or as Chill likes to call it, to brank the front. And if you're not making tons of units, just having them pour nonstop out of all your hatcheries, you're going to struggle with the Protoss player who compensates in that fashion. And Jaedong's doing not as great a job of covering the map anymore. I would like some more Overlords poaching in up here on the top. In particular, this region of black scares me. Because, you know, again, 99 games out of 100 doesn't matter, but 1 out of 100 those drops get in there. We see some beautiful storms coming in here. This bothers me, this attack by Jaedong. Because what is the purpose of this attack? The only purpose I can conceive is to say, I know this is a key piece of terrain, I'm going to get hold of it and prevent my opponent still from taking this expansion. But Zerg has an expo down here. So it's impossible for Zerg to hold this and defend this the instant Protoss starts aggressively moving into this general area. And, you know, for Protoss, actually, let's back out and just do some distance comparisons. So Zerg has to take paths like this to come back and defend, right? He has to do this huge arc with units that are up here to defend the bottom, or he'd have to come down here along this path. But if Protoss moves like this, and didn't work, and then just comes right back up here, it's almost like a straight line, and he gets to snatch up some reinforcements along the way. So this attack felt a little bit dangerous, because not only are your units not in the best position to make that attack, to make that push, but when they do, you know, if it is a raging success, you still have to worry about your Southern Expo. So we have yet more excellent macro by both players. This is the point at which Zerg generally needs to sort of like cool the jets a little bit and not be so outrageously aggressive. Defilers are really going to be super key right now because you don't really have that much gas. I mean, even though you have a fourth one at the bottom, it's still going to be tough to have a big gas-focused army for the rest of the game because your main guys are going to get depleted real soon. So I prefer a Hydra, or excuse me, a Lurkerling Defiler Scourge combination. But see, now this look for Zerg looks beautiful, right? Since Zerg's not going so hard for this high ground pod, But instead, staying back defensively on his own high ground, he can easily defend all these bottom 4 bases. His main is the only real minor danger, but as long as he has Overlords and Scourge patrolling up there, it'll be fine. And there's the Defiler Mound. Again, very big mistake, I think, to try to get Ultralisks in this situation. You already have 8 hatcheries, and the only way to put them to 100% use is to be making those low-tech units, the Zerglings, the Defilers, the Hydras, to eventually be morphed into Lurkers. If you get the Ultralisks, one of those hatcheries is just going to be stockpiled at 3 larvae all game long. You can't support it. Yeah, God, that's a lot of gateways. Jesus. Oh, and look how good Stork is. Oh my God, you see that, ladies and gentlemen? Or should I say lady, maybe, and gentlemen? Alright, everything seems normal. We're just going to go here. Oh yeah, Jaedong still doing some wonderful techniques with his Zerglings, trying to delay this top expansion as long as possible. Big Protoss army moving out. It appears I rewound too far back. They're checking out the bases. Some extra cannons here. Everything seems to be fine. 2 forges. And then this is incredible. In the midst of all this pushing out in the middle and taking the top left, Stork built a whole bunch of cannons in his main, just in case a big drop came in to kill him, because not only is Jaedong known for big drops, a lot of times in this situation, but it's just a possibility that a Zerg could do. So you need to account for it. And that little thing is going to help Stork not lose. That's one of the key things that players overlook, is as they're getting really far spread out and really aggressive, they mentally go, I have won. And then they ignore things like defense in the main against harassment. Then the harassment comes and does a bunch of damage. And then the player gets pissed because he says, but wait, I won this game. Because they mentally told themselves that they won this game. And then, inevitably, we have the tragic event that occurs that player loses to some harassment. And, you know, he curses life and doesn't learn the lesson that, you know, just got to make sure you don't lose to any sort of silly little harassment. So Jaedong doing an excellent job picking off those Archons. Really important technique. I'd almost say it's more important than picking off the Templar. Getting those Archons out. First of all, getting the Archons is a lot easier. And if you try to snipe Templar too often, you get addicted to it, and then you can start losing huge packs. But the Archons is a very good technique to make sure that you have an excellent grip of. And so here starts to come the stalemate scenario that can happen in this matchup, where neither player can really take any more bases, or the top and the bottom are already taken. And the question is, how do you go about doing anything to your opponent? You know, it generally happens, as we're going to see, it looks like Protoss is going to be able to take the top. Ooh, that sucks. Losing all the probes. Yeah, it looks like Protoss is going to be able to take top. And at this point in the game, how do you really get an advantage? We're going to be talking about that a lot as time progresses, but just something to think about. How do you get a tactical lead when there's an even map split? So it just looks like some target firing going on the Nexus. Makes sense for Jaedong to be attempting that sort of thing, because Jaedong was busy defending his attack at the bottom and has a clear lane of movement to just get up there to the top left expansion so we can just kill it off relatively easily. And isn't this a beautiful tactic? Note that Stork isn't just doing this, okay? Just if there's one theme I want to emphasize in this game, it's how these players trim the fat off everything. There's nothing that's excessive. Everything has double and triple purposes. So those 12 Zealots aren't just 12 Zealots that are going to be dropped into Zerg's main. Instead, it is a bunch of Zealots that went to clear top, and then if you move a shuttle there, it's really easy to cart those Zealots over. It's really annoying when you use 12 Zealots to clear an expansion, and then they're just kind of hanging out there doing nothing, and they would have been useful in that battle, but you didn't have them there, and now you just have a small Zealot army that can get picked off easily. But by doing this, it really extends the purpose of those Zealots, and they become these magical units capable of incredible things, such as a drop like this. Isn't that beautiful? That extended purpose of that little Zealot group. And going right up here, I think the pool is one of the best things to target in general, but especially on match point, where your Zerg opponent will almost certainly be making mostly Zerglings because of that mineral natural expansion, how starved he is for gas. And then also the pool takes a long time to rebuild, so that's definitely a significant consideration. And look, here's the drop, and look at all these cannons that are here that are going to delay just long enough for Stork to possibly be able to come home and help. I say possibly because I haven't actually seen this game, and I don't know what happens. So right now, Jaedong cannot make any Zerglings at all. And it looks like those Zealots did way more damage than Jaedong was expecting. Yeah, like having to send a second wave of units back to defend it. And Jaedong now being like, uh-oh, I'm trying to do some serious damage to the top left. But see, those extra cannons in the main are helping out from that drop. And imagine for a moment if Jaedong had never done those drops. Too many players never focus on those cannons. They'll watch this game and they'll say something like, oh, I guess I need to be dropping Zealots into my opponent's main or something like that. Oh, I guess I need to be moving out with a bunch of gateways. And they neglect the little things like, oh, he's building cannons in his main for extra defense. Oh, he's doing this Zealot drop only when he's taking the top North Expo. And look at Stork just calmly rebuilding a whole bunch of extra cannons. Because he's a superhero. And more drop stuff. And you know what? I like this drop technique by Jaedong as well. Just glance at the minimap. There is a Zerg triangle down here. There's a nice little tucked away area of defense where he can easily move back and forth throughout here. So why not just drop into his opponent's main? They're literally doing the same thing. If I have one of the expansions that's next to my opponent's main, I'm going to be dropping into his main. No reason Protoss can't do it, even though they don't have overlords. And this is part of the reason why these defilers are so key, because with all this high ground, low ground junk, if they try to advance up to your high ground, you can simply swarm your lurkers, and there's very, very little that they can do about it. Now, a reasonable question is, why are we doing this as Zerg? This is perhaps a question that people tend not to ask. They do one of two things. One is to go, well, drops are good, and I'm dropping them and I'm killing them, therefore I'm good, you know. And the other one is to say, well, I can't really think of a purpose for it, you know, or these buildings aren't really that important, so, you know, it's a bad idea. Let's think about both of these in this context. So, first of all, I can't remember what the first thing I said was. Let's just do the second thing. Yeah, like, oh, these buildings aren't really very important. Or, oh, I'm just going to do it because I'm killing off these buildings, and that's good. Yeah, that's the first thing I said. That's right. So the issue with that line of thought is that it can convince you not to drop here a lot of times, and that's not so good. What's the main super awesome important reason to be hitting this is that it's going to draw units away from the middle of the map down here. And you'll note, if you're down here defending, the most difficult spot to defend when you have all your troops here is this top left expansion. That's the main purpose of the drop. I mean, yeah, the buildings are a bonus, and that's great, but you're really trying to draw your opponent down. So if your opponent is not coming down, I don't really think that this attack is that good. A lot of players will relentlessly throw units because, again, they go, drops are good, therefore I will drop. And they won't understand what the purpose of it is. And, you know, this is a very good technique, again, because note, if my Protoss opponent has all his focus in the bottom left main, that means I can do super effective attacks all the way up here. But there's no defilers here. This is the one thing that bugs me a lot by this attack. And look, it's been like 3 little limbo line waves. Let's actually just rewind and rewatch that, because I think that's pretty sloppy. So here comes the drop, or here is the drop doing damage, and then let's look in the center. Just look at the minimap. Here comes wave 1. And then wave 2 is starting to move out. Alright, here's wave 1. It's going to get stormed a bunch. More storm going on. And alright, okay, here's my second wave of stuff. Alright, guys, we're ready for the attack. And in a little bit, here's like the third wave, where he's like, oh yeah, I guess I need to have some good surround here. Okay, there we go. And then look, there's some more units coming from behind to wrap up that third wave. I mean, get better attack organization. This should be a key play, a very common play. Just drop down here, big attack over here. Set those hotkeys up in advance. And Stork just mining away. We haven't really taken a look at that top expansion, so I'm hoping there are some Reavers being built there, because as you'll note, Reavers are incredibly good at defending that top area. Some Zealots there. It looks like extra Zealots are being sent for defense. And again, those Zealots now have the threat of being dropped into Jaedong's main. Wow, no Reavers. That's... how curious. I do think that that's really important to wall off that front with a forge and proceed to get Reavers there. I think this is a little bit too long to wait not to get Reavers, but, you know, I trust Stork. I think Stork knows what he's doing. I think he'll be getting them relatively soon here. And now I see the strength of being able to get that forge up early on there, to be able to wall that off. It's hard to break. And notice this is this imbalance I was talking about earlier. This ramp, because it points this way, you can get in between the reinforcements and the expansions relatively easily against the player who's at the left base. So look at these swarms, completely cutting them off. You know, this is really sloppy. This is +2 armor. I'm blown away that that's not +3. We're like 20 minutes into the game. You absolutely should be +3. Make certain that you get +3 very, very early on. Super important thing to do. Because again, for any of you who are unaware of this, anytime the Protoss is ahead of the Zerg with attack upgrade, the Protoss Zealots kill Zerglings in 2 hits. If the Carapace upgrade is equal to or greater than the attack upgrade for Protoss, the Zerglings die to Zealots in 3 hits. So basically means that those Zealots are like just murdering the Zerglings super easily. And so, you know, a lot of stuff being lost, but no big deal. So this is the 10 spot for Zerg. Really, any time that this top expansion was able to get popped up for Protoss, that's a really intense time for Zerg. So right now, I can say very definitively that this is a huge problem for Zerg. How could Zerg have avoided that? Well, earlier on, we could have been doing a whole bunch of drops here, and we really needed to have an Overlord at that top base just spotting for it. Because it was pretty easy for Stork to take that top base. There really wasn't that much contest for it. He sent some units up there, defended the probe, started it, and then dropped Zealots into the main. And that distracted Jaedong long enough, but you gotta do something a little bit more than that. As Zerg, you know, you can't just hope to defend for a little while and then, you know, not worry about that top base. You really gotta be scouting aggressively with your Overlords. And this is one thing I love about Stork, is that look how many cannons he built in here. I think it's almost never excessive to build this many cannons at your 3rd or 4th gas. I think this is actually quite standard to do this, because there's almost no way that you're going to be able to defend it from these giant death drops like this. And, you know, that's not so good. I'm sensing disorganization from Jaedong. That drop at the top couldn't really have been helped so much, but I'm noticing a lot of defilers all over the place that aren't quite there in time. Yeah, getting Ultralisks. See, I really, really strongly think that Plague, Lurkers, and Zerglings are what's going to win the game. If you just pull back as Zerg for a little bit, play a little bit more defensively, scratch your nose a little bit, make sure it's not itchy. If you just play defensively, plague the army relentlessly, and just use those heavy gas units, Defilers and Lurkers, for defense, you can eventually just wear him down. And because you haven't been spending all this money on Ultralisks, which, as we're almost certainly going to see, die really quickly, you end up with this nice cheap Zergling army that stays pretty massive all game long. Yeah, see, there's the plagues. And I still prefer a lot more Lurkers here. The Ultralisk I don't quite like. Yes, there's an Ultralisk, you know, falling relatively easily. Excuse me. And, I mean, so Jaedong's saturated that. He has a Scourge patrolling there. That's great. So we're in Stalemate City right now. As Protoss, what I want to do is I want to get Reavers, and I just want to sit on my ass. You don't really need to do anything at this point as Protoss. You have 5 bases up. You have half the map. It's up to the Zerg to take you out, because Protoss really is going to be better off in an equal fight. Protoss is going to win with equal bases versus equal bases. Now, these Ultralisks, even though they might look scary, should still be falling pretty quickly in this situation. I mean, there's a lot of Archons that Stork's going to make. And again, if Stork makes Reavers, it's not really going to be an issue. Yeah, look at the Archons just making short work of it. Yeah, the Zealots are dying very quickly. But those can be replenished relatively easily. And, I mean, at this stage, oh god, I mean, Ooh, Storm drops down there. Oh yeah, sorry, this is the other thing that you want to do. Thank you, Stork, for reminding me. You want to, get Reavers and just turtle and sit back, and then just harass your opponent. If you do any kind of Storm drop, and oh my god, I want to see another Storm drop because there's a Templar hidden there. Oh, Templar is getting puked on. If you do any sort of harassment and just eat into your opponent's economy even a little bit, that's just going to be a bigger and bigger and bigger lead for you in this late game stage. Because Zerg's going to be like, oh, now I need to remake drones, and as we can see, Zerg's already getting pretty much mined out. I mean, bottom right, his natural and his main, it looks mined out. His mineral natural looks like it's almost mined out. And this is just an incredibly icky situation. Look how low his money is. You know, I always talk about macro, and he is macroing like a beast. Now this drop, this is the sort of drop where, what is the goal of this drop? This is the sort of thing that you're doing just because that is the most vulnerable location on the entire map. And you're going to be able to kill something. Oh yeah, look at this beautiful attack organization. So again, the good old 1-2 punch. I'm going to drop in your back. As you put position in somewhere where I want you to, I'm going to attack at the front. Very common. But still, at this stage in the game, if you can just draw like 8-9 zealots down and pick them off as free units, that's going to be a big benefit. We're able to kill off some of the gateways. Yeah, look, pure zealots against, Zerglings and Ultralisks. It's going to be a good position for Zerg. So Zerg likes to be in that spot quite a bit. Oh man, we've been hanging at like 995 viewers for a while now, and I keep glancing over, being like, come on, break 1,000. We'll see if we can get that done in the next 10 minutes or so. So here comes the big push right here, and what I'm seeing right here is an army that would have been crushed by lurkers, right? Lurkers and defilers, and pretty much when these Ultralisks fall, that's it for the gas expenditures for Jaedong. It looks like Jaedong might barely kill it off, and, you know, this looks pretty bad for Protoss, but I would call this barely at this point in the game. Oh, well, actually, suddenly there's like 4 more Ultralisks than I was counting beforehand. This still isn't quite so amazing for Zerg, because Zerg has 1 mining base right now. And there's so many cannons at the top left, and in my opinion, if Protoss loses pretty much everything here, like his original second natural and his third natural, he's going to have top left and top mid for quite some time with all his stormers and all his cannons. That, you know, it's still a pretty tense situation for Zergy. And Zergs, he's doing the right thing now. He's going straight for that northern expansion. Yeah, look how everything's mined out. He really needs to get that northern expansion for 2 reasons. One, Protoss can hold that really easily unless he really tries to. Ladies and gentlemen, we've just hit 1,000 viewers. Hooray! Thank you very much, everyone. I very much so appreciate everyone who's checking it out live, as well as my friendly neighborhood on-demand viewers, especially the European crew, who've been messaging me quite a bit, thanking the on-demand service. So I gotta give a shout out to the people who dedicate themselves to watch it in the on-demand section. Yeah, look how great this harassment is. In the midst of this huge crisis, Stork is still aware that the only income is that bottom base. So here comes in some storming, and here's the swarm, and look at this gateway wall. This gateway wall off just lines the units up to be stormed. Love that sort of thing. I'm a personal bigger fan of the forge wall, but now that I look at it, I think this gateway wall is probably a little bit better because it's a bigger unit, it has more space that it takes up here, and we can block it back here. And we don't, because if the forge is up here, you can kill it off pretty easily with lurkers if you're not careful. So this is just a little bit farther back, so it covers that big space at the edge. So just constant storms defending everything, and this is what was so scary about that big attack that happened not so long ago, right down here at Zerg's high ground pod. Even though Zerg won with all those Ultralisks, again, that's it, gas-wise. That's pretty much all the units, or all the Ultralisks that Jaedong is ever going to have in this entire game. And they're slowly getting whittled down by, you know, some cannons and some DTs. And it is so hard right now for Zerg to break either of these expansions, but especially that top one. So that's why I was just like, oh god, because I was looking at that army and I was going, I just don't know if it can break this base. And after all this excessive effort, just losing tons of units, throwing tons of Zerglings and Lurkers and swarms down. It looks like Zerg is going to barely be able to break this. Still getting storms out, still picking things off. And meanwhile, Protoss is just massing up a huge army. Protoss, I think, smartly just held back and said, well, yeah, I mean, if that expansion falls, it falls, but I'm going to try to wear him down the entire time before then. Because now it's just so many units. Oh my god, so many zealots. And I'm actually really impressed by Stork, the fact that he didn't transition to Lurkers at any point this game. Yeah, look, Stork's still kind of held strong, right? He just still actually barely held off that top base. I mean, I know he lost the Nexus, but, he has some buildings still left there, and that's pretty impressive to me, that he's able to pull that thing off. Oh, sorry, I leaned in close because I thought it said that Jaedong had 0 upgrades on his attack, but it was actually a 3. Because, if you don't have upgrades and you're 35 minutes into the game, yeah, that's generally pretty much horrible. So both players are broke. This is the only thing that Jaedong has running is this bottom base. And, this is looking kind of similar to the Khal vs. Hoja match, except Hoja was much more active about just keeping Protoss on his feet when Protoss was at the advantage. And what we've seen is instead the Protoss being the one to keep Zerg on his feet with these fancy little drops up here. Even, though Protoss lost all those buildings, he just calmly rebuilt this enormous army. Look how big that is. That's really impressive. And again, okay, remember earlier on, okay, I'm going to come right back here. What is the goal for Protoss on a map like Matchpoint when there's some sort of even map split? Well, the goal is just to, hang out. You don't really need to do anything. Especially, you don't need to go in and just kill him immediately. It's totally okay to just sit back and be a little bit passive. So Stork lost his whole army and just sort of pulled back for a little bit. And then look, doing that same goal, sending most of his army over to this right side just to be able to take that top expansion. Because he knows that he is way ahead of his opponent. I mean, neither of them are really mining too much. But, very clearly I think Stork is in the much better situation. And if Stork feels like, Jaedong has no units, you should go ahead and attack. No reason to really, stretch it out too much longer. But for the most part, look at this. Very passive use of units right now. No need to attack at all. And if you're Zerg, what do you do right now? Well, you run up with your Defiler and start plaguing those Zealots one at a time. Or I should say, a clump at a time. Yeah, there you go. And then you're going to be pulling back and just waiting for them to whittle down in health. And if you had a bunch of Lurkers, you'd be able to do a whole bunch more damage. But with just Ultralisks, that happens where you get the surrounds. Yeah, there's the Lurkers. With just Lurkers, I actually think this would have been a much easier task for Jaedong to be able to break this top base. But still, with the Plague, this is actually surprisingly close. I actually was not expecting the game to be this close. I actually thought Protoss had quite a big advantage, but I think that not getting the Reavers was a little bit of a mistake. Perhaps he just felt super pressured and needed, all those Zealots to be right at the front and thought his only ticket to winning was by barreling his opponent's front with gigantic forces relentlessly. Those Ultras are just too expensive and they're going to fall so easily. And yeah, it kind of sucks. Actually, it doesn't kind of suck, it just really sucks. He doesn't have any Lurkers. Started a sentence and didn't remember what the end was. But yeah, I just think it's so important. We're seeing very clearly right now how these Ultras are just sort of getting in the way. Ultras do a lot of damage, but unless you have the resources to support it, those smaller units are almost always going to be better. And oh man, ooh, that's a game right there. That's the serious winner right there, considering that Jaedong's broke on gas. But yeah, if you are ever considering going Ultralist, you need to be aware of how many hatches you have right now and what your money situation is. If there is not a possibility to take 2 or 3 more bases, you probably shouldn't be going Ultralisks as your late game plan. You're going to go broke kind of fast, and you're just not really going to have that many Ultralisks. And you end up with one of these dumb-looking armies where you have 3 Ultras and 40 Zerglings, and then he kills off all the Zerglings with a storm or 2, and you're just left with these supposedly super powerful units, but because you don't have that many of them, they burn super fast. trying to do some cute stuff here, but again, Stork's just being very passive with his army. He's not even building a nexus. He's just gonna long-range mine and slowly starve Zerg. And there she blows. Poor Jaedong, and his nose is still itchy. Completely understand, man. I have a constantly itchy nose. Picking stuff off, this is good, but I mean, Ultralisks are mainly useful for being able to get in and out and, you know, doing a ton of damage and then backing away. You know, these big multiple attacks on multiple bases all over the map technique. But on match point, it's a little bit more difficult for Ultralisks to actually get away with being able to do that. So, there's a lot of reasons why on this map I just specifically don't quite like the Ultralisks in the later stages of the game. One really great game that I think every single person right now should go watch directly after this match. It's free against Jaedong on Longinus. It's one of the early games before Jaedong was considered the giant beast that he is today. And Jaedong literally, like, Ultralisk rushes, right? He takes 4 bases and just goes straight for Ultralisks. And free just rapes it. And it just demonstrates that, yeah, you can go for the Ultralisks, and that's great, but Jaedong had pretty much no way to get, like, extra bases given the setup that he was in. And, you know, with that Ultralisk rush, if he had waited till he had 5-6 bases and then did it so he could get, you know, more resources after the fact, he would have been fine. But it's just an incredible demonstration of how Ultralisks really are not that powerful if your Protoss opponent is right there with you. So, you know, he's going to try to do some stuff, but, you know, he's at 30 food, so what can you do? It's at times like these that I think players tend to do the least analysis. Because, for instance, what would Mutalisks have done here? Probably quite a lot. You probably could have gotten away with using Mutalisks to take out probes that were doing stuff, to take out Templar. It would have been just like the mid-game again, because there was actually this arc of food count that happened in this game. There was this big arc where both of them were maxed, but then it's coming back down to like 70-80 food again. And about the 70-80 food range is where you use a whole bunch of Mutalisks to whittle down a smaller Protoss army. Why not do that here? A lot of people just get to their late game composition, so for instance Ultralisk Zergling, and they just only make Ultralisk Zergling for the rest of the game. And I think it's useful because in the moment you're going to have some issues being able to think of that because the late game is a very intense part of StarCraft. But afterwards, you should just stop for a little bit and say, should I have gotten Lurkers? Should I have gotten Hydras? Should I have gotten Mutalisks? And that's actually something that happened to me because I used to be this sort of player. I can make Ultralisks now, therefore I will only make Ultralisks. And actually, Testy, the famous Canadian player, was showing me a game where he got to late game, and he just suddenly started making a whole bunch of Lurkers again, instead of Ultralisks. And he just did a phenomenal job of holding. So look at that. Great job by Stork. So that game was actually kind of a nail-biter. But I think Jaedong was at a pretty big lead later on. Yeah, Stork is blown away, man. That was a sweet game. There's a few things I want to review real fast here. And I'm just going to unmute and just take 1 or 2 questions really quickly here. Because I've been going for about an hour right now and the matches are on. Actually, holy crap, the matches are on. I'm going to take 1 question. I won't be able to review it. But again, I think Jaedong, in his mid-game, wasn't doing the best job of keeping a good focus. He was expanding somewhere that made it hard for him to contain, and he kept kind of trying to go for both of those. And I think it screw him up. So let's actually stop this thing really fast and just take a few questions. Yeah, I think that screwed him up quite a bit to have that thing in the mid-game. And also at the later stages, I really dislike that Ultralisk technique. But I mean, overall, both players played phenomenally well. And we can see how both these players were able to guide it straight to the mid-game just by being smart and safe and that sort of thing. So let's see here. What are some? What is the best game ever? Oh yeah, so Master Pitt says, if early game Stork had gone 2-gate rush, Jaedong, would he have canceled his 3rd hatch and gone mass laying? Would he have saved larva for that? Actually, with the timing, what ends up happening is that you try to scout the rush or get information about the rush right before you build the 3rd hatch. So that's probably the most useful technique to try to work on. Just make sure that sort of thing can happen. Damn it. Sorry, I'm getting a little distracted because you know what? I've been going for an hour and the matches are on, and I know a lot of people want to go ahead and view those. So let's just make this the last question right now. So, Mepi says, is there a reason for Jaedong's lack of Mutalisks? Wouldn't he be able to snipe Templar quite easily, even with the Archons? Jaedong lost most of his armies to Storm. Perhaps it would have been useful. I don't think it was essential. The issue is with, on this map, because you can pull so far to one side of the map, it occasionally can be very difficult to get the Mutalisks in there to snipe the Templars, and now you have some Mutalisks, so you got to think of some additional uses for them, and there really are not that many because they can't control wide spaces, they can't control the Protoss' expansions, because there pretty much is an obvious next choice for the expansion for Protoss, and Protoss is going to be prepared to take that. On a map like Byzantium, that's all spread all over the place, if you get the Mutalisks, they have tons of uses. They can pick off Zealots, they can hit all the extra expansions, you can pick off workers, and they get the High Templar. So there's a lot of uses for that. So I think that in particular on match point, you might want to steer a little bit farther away from Mutalisks, because in the later stages of the game, they just don't really have that much utility past just Templar sniping. And at high levels, just Templar sniping isn't quite going to be enough for your Mutalisks. So you know what? That's going to wrap up Day 9 Daily number 75, which means I am 3/4 of the way to 100, which, as you know, I'm going to go ahead and hit. And since it is 8:06, I think that all of you should go watch the official pro matches. One thing I did note, I had to offload the last Day 9 Dailies 20 through... people messaging me on Skype. I had to offload Day 9 Dailies 20 through 30, so that means that I will figure out a way for them to re-upload somewhere else. And also, I'll be streaming my games maybe next week. I'm kind of really busy, so I'm hoping I'll have time to do that. But no matter what, you're going to be able to see it on the schedule. So thanks so much, everyone, and cheers.